So I want you to imagine the most futuristic car that you can think of. Something that is sleek, something that is fast, something that is high tech. I'm thinking a DeLorean, but that's a relic from my age long ago. Something in the future, an amazing, amazing car. And now you open up the hood, and under the hood is this like Buick Century 1980 V6, rusted out, no fuel injection, just a beast of a motor. And you're like, really? This is what's powering my amazing car? That is the best analogy for 40K. That is what I can think of. And by that, what I mean is we have the Space Marine. Rogue Trader, 1988, the Space Marine comes into existence, and the Space Marine stat line is set in place. Strength, toughness, strength 4, toughness 4, 3-up armor save, power armor, slight changes there over time, but 3-up armor save, and a bolt gun with essentially the same profile throughout all editions. So Games Workshop comes up with this formula of battle value, of points, of power level, whatever we want to call it per whatever edition. But the idea is you and I can more or less have a fair game. Not that 40K has ever been known for balance. That's why the Rogue Trader version of 40K introduced the idea of a game master to kind of balance things out with the mission and hidden information. But that means now you kind of need 3 people to play the game. But essentially Games Workshop figures, well, here's the Space Marine stat line. If it's better than the Space Marine, jack up the points. If it's not as good as a Space Marine, lower the points. All right? We kind of see in the 4th edition rulebook this idea explaining points, where they've got like, a Space Marine should be able to take on 2 orcs and survive. Well, no, maybe in the narrative, but no, because you are on a D6 based system, Games Workshop, and that is something we're going to exploit. And by exploit, I don't mean cheat, but I mean understand the stress points of the game, and understand if we're playing Eldar, the focus of this video, you need to understand the DNA of Eldar, regardless of what army you're playing, Samhan Warhost, Spirit armies, whatever we're going to play. You need to understand this DNA in a similar way that we looked at the DNA of Necrons. The gaming DNA is the reanimation protocols, is the back in the day, the will be back roll, the idea to constantly be generating potential losses on there, and how do we utilize that? So if you look at the various editions of 40K, and this is important for the foundation here, if you look at the various editions of 40K, a great example would be Chaos Space Marines, where for the most part, Chaos Space Marines have a similar Marine profile, strength 4, toughness 4, 3-up armor save, bolter, bolt gun, bolt pistol. But now we start adding on cult abilities like Plague Marines or Slanesh or Cornate Berserkers that'll give you more attacks, higher toughness, greater initiative. You start adding on marks. You start adding on things that make them, in theory, better than Space Marines. And the points go up. 16 to 18 points for a Space Marine, depending on the edition of 40K. And for Chaos Space Marines, anywhere from, with the marks and with other upgrades, anywhere from 18, 22, 25, 23, 28 points. I think at one point we were paying 28 points per Plague Marine. The challenge here was the DNA is still Space Marines, and it's still a D6 based system. So when you get hit with enough volume of dice, you die. And your special rules and your special abilities really don't account for much because you're not using them every turn to save you. Grey Knights, this is also Grey Knight DNA, ironically, in there too. All the special abilities and war gear and things they have, when you get hit with that volume of dice, it's still a D6 based system, and you're still dealing with 3-up save, now with AP modifiers, so in theory it's less than the 3-up save, and you're dealing with your toughness 4 on there. Okay, so if it's greater than Space Marines, it's more points. If it's less than Space Marines, then it's less points, and that's going to make for a fair game. Well, now we have Eldar, right? So they can't be as strong as Space Marines, so their strength and toughness are less. And this is important for Eldar, but it also somewhat applies for other T3-based armies to understand the vulnerabilities of them. So they should be less points, right? Even if you got a bump in initiative, they should be less points. Well, a lot of Eldar troops, the weaponry is on par with Space Marines, so Games Workshop is going to increase the points. And then their special abilities, a lot of their special abilities are greater than Space Marines. So they're going to potentially increase the points. Really on aspects and other things like that, Guardians are kind of dirt cheap, but not really. Because in order to compete with Space Marines, we have to upgrade things to the max. You can't, with Xenos, you really can't run things naked and cheap. With Space Marines, you can, because you can rely on that Space Marine DNA of Strength 4, Toughness 4, 3-up save, Bolt Gun. So when you play Eldar, what you have to realize is, and it's hard to do sometimes, right? This is a D6 based gaming system, and I was really hoping for 8th edition that Games Workshop they're bold. I do believe this is the best edition of 40K, and Games Workshop certainly has been very bold with how they are releasing things and the models and the factions and the rules they're experimenting with. Yes, so this isn't a complaint, but I was hoping they would break and move either a D100 or a multi-dice system. An example would be like Terminator Genesis or Beyond the Gates of Antares, where essentially you're using D&D dice for the spread. And I think it's in gamer DNA enough to understand those dice and use those dice. We're not like a traditional wargaming crowd 35 years ago or 30 years ago when 40K started, where D6 was all it was. I mean, role-playing was regulated to a back room, and no one even really knew what the heck you were doing. You were rolling strange dice and consulting forbidden tomes of D&D, running adventures. It's crazy. There's no miniatures involved, right? It's not historical. It's not legit. So with that, the D6 is still in effect. When you get hit with weapons that the majority of the weapons in the game are strength 4 or higher, or if you're playing an army that's strength 3 weapons, you have them in mass because there's something like Imperial Guard or Space Bug Tyranids on there, your toughness 3, you're just going to evaporate. Even if you have an armor save, even if you have good numbers like Guardians and stuff, you are going to evaporate. So what this means is in the shooting phase, you are extremely, extremely vulnerable. In the assault phase, you are extremely, extremely vulnerable. If you get hit, you're in trouble. If you get hit and your opponent has, luck or not, depends on your opinion. Lucky dice, right? Lucky dice for them, unlucky for Fritz here. And they score above average with wounds. They're rolling hot. They're rolling like all 5s and 6s, tons of them. You're going to get hit. You're going to be in trouble there. So what we need to do, mobility more than ever. Vehicles to kind of support our war host. And a couple of anchor points. I believe that's Wraith Lords. I've been using Wraith Lords. I believe Wraith Lords... I've always been a Wraith Lord fan, so we got to do a Wraith Lord podcast and get that up in the archive. But I feel like Wraith Lords and their bigger knight cousins and everything are becoming more and more prominent with the Eldar war host, with Eldar armies in there. You need to protect the T3. You can't generate, so you can't go Imperial Guard and say, okay, look, I'm toughness 3, I'm going to generate that by tons and tons and tons of Eldar. You could play Horde. In my Erebus Elf Footdar army, I've got like 20, 40, like 60 or so Guardians on there. It's impressive. And with the Shuriken catapults, it's impressive. But they start getting hit. They start going down on there. I mean, we're losing a lot of painters and farmers in this war host on it. A lot of craftsmen. So with that, it works for Imperial Guard because they're cheap. But Eldar have all these special rules and special abilities. The points are higher based on the T3. So you need something, mobility. You need something as an anchor point. You need something to slow down your opponent. So in theory, let's say Space Marines, 1 Space Marine tack squad or 2 can attack at a time, not their entire army hitting up your war host. You need to be able to move. You need to be able to fade. Where you want to go and how you want to go, well, that's now, that's kind of up to what you want to play. If we look at my Sam Han war host, jet bikes, Vipers, Wave Serpents, Fire Prisms, everything's mech'd up. I've got speed everywhere. If we look, well, Harlequins are a different story on there. Harlequins are basically like, and we'll do a Harlequin podcast, it's basically like, I'm going to self-destruct on you and cause so much damage. I just need to really do all that damage at the beginning of the game before I have nothing left on there. I mean, I consider Harlequins really a sacrificial army. You're really going to kind of just lose stuff like crazy. It's just the nature of being aggressive based on a Space Elf stat line. And then my Footdar They make use of aspects, certainly. I mean, look, fire dragons are still amazing. You can't argue with fire dragons. You have a problem, you put fire dragons out. You don't know what you're going to face, you put fire dragons out. I mean, they just slag everything. But I do use a number of Warwalkers and Wraith Lords to kind of make that work on there as those anchor points. So T3 versus T4, huge, huge, huge. It's the genetics, literally the DNA of Eldar that we need to understand on there, because the stats are amazing. The stats are good. They've got a lot of abilities, but it's still a T3 space elf army.